Hi there. Today we're going to talk about what imperialism looked like in India specifically. So, again, we've been talking about imperialism, which is when one country comes in and takes over another aspect or many aspects of another country. Even though it doesn't belong to you, they're still going to come in and they're going to take your stuff and they're going to use it for their own benefit and they're going to exploit you and they're going to utilize your resources to a terrible point, and then they're going to try to sell these goods back to you. So today we're going to look at India specifically and how Britain came in and took over India and ruled it for quite some time after this. Okay, so looking at your notes, the I is going to stand for the Indian imperialism began with. It's going to start with something called the British East India Trading Company. So British economic interest in India really started in about the 1600s when the British East India Trading Company set up some trading posts around Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta, which are all cities and major ports in India. And at first, India, if you guys remember, the Mughal dynasty used to exist in India from about 1500 to 1700. And really, for that period of time, it's going to keep the European traders under control. Because if you remember, those were the people that had things like war elephants and rockets and that really cool composite bow and arrow. They had really great weaponry. They had amazing things to kind of keep the Europeans at bay, even though some of the Europeans, especially the British, tried to come in and take over India, but the Mughals were able to effectively keep these people away. But then the Mughal Empire started to collapse by about 1700, 1707, something like that. So they really all the whole thing just really started to kind of fall apart. So the British were able to actually, roll up into this area and start to take it over once this Mughal Empire finally collapsed. Okay, so N is actually what I was talking about before when it says no total British control of India yet, because India's ruling Mughal Empire is going to keep those European traders under control. Sorry, I kind of mentioned that in the last slide, but this is what it looks like. So down here, if you look in this picture, was the actual Mughal Empire itself, and it pretty much had the entirety of India except for really the bottom portions for a long time. So for about 200 years or so, the Mughals were pretty strongly controlling this particular area. Here's where it talks about the decline of the Mughal Empire. So, like I said, beginning in about 1707, okay, so I was right on the date before, good for me, it allowed for the British East India Trading Company to start controlling India's political and economic life. And the British are going to make just huge profits on this particular area once they can finally kind of squeeze their way in there and move the Mughals right on out of the territory. If you notice again down here in this picture, because I'm a pretty big visual person, I really like visuals, as you guys know. So I don't know what color this is, beige. Let's go with beige. The beige color are the Indian states that are kind of left and that have sort of broken away previously from the Mughal Empire and made themselves independent. And then the rest of this pink stuff is going to be Britain. So they're taking over hugely important areas. Look at all this coastal stuff that they're getting a hold of. So they're going to wind up making quite a bit of money, as well as all this territory up here, which is getting into trading with some other peoples that exist around this area, and especially getting up into these Himalayan mountains and stuff where they really don't have a lot of stuff. You're going to be able to sell a lot of your goods that you're making back home in Britain to these people who basically have nothing, and then improve all kinds of infrastructure and really just slowly, start to take everything over. Okay, so at first, India was treasured by the British more for its potential rather than for its actual profit. So they saw quite a bit of potential in this area. I mean, you're talking about an area. India is this area which has a huge history, very, very rich culture. There is a lot of natural resources there. There are a ton of people that you could potentially utilize and take over and use for work. Back with the natural resources and stuff, you also have like riches, huge amounts of riches. India was a very, very rich country for a long time, especially to the Europeans, because in India there was a ton of diamonds and sapphires and emeralds and gems, that the Europeans really value. So they're very interested in kind of a get rich quick, sort of area. So the Industrial Revolution, when that went down, it winds up turning Britain into the world's workshop. And they seemingly started to provide goods and services really to, people all over the world. So there's a lot of pressure there for them to be able to keep that up and continuing to be number one in the world. So India, being this major supplier of raw materials for this workshop, was just a very appealing place to go in and take over, especially considering this Mughal Empire just happened to be collapsing. So that was really good timing for them. Also, there's about 300 million people or so at the time. Now there's like a billion, 1.2 or 3 billion, something like that. But at the time, it was about 300 million people living in India, and that's a huge market of people to be able to sell British-made goods to. So Britain all of a sudden considered India to be what they called the brightest, quote-unquote, jewel in the crown, which means if you think of a crown and you've got jewels in them, if you were the brightest or the biggest jewel in that crown, you are therefore the most valuable. So India was considered to be the brightest jewel in the British crown. Eventually, British influence and British control is going to become so overbearing, and businesses were really only allowed to sell raw materials to Britain and only purchase British goods. I'm talking about basically a sphere of influence here with a little bit of direct control added in there. I'm sorry. In the beginning, it was indirect control. That's right. It's eventually going to move to direct control. But in the beginning, right now, it's indirect, as well as a sphere of influence, because they could only purchase British goods. They could only sell raw materials to Britain. There's a lot of resentment that's going to wind up happening from the Indians, because they believe that the British were not only controlling their land, but they're also trying to convert them to Christianity. They're exploiting them, and they're definitely right, obviously, in this scenario. But they were starting to harbor a lot of ill feelings towards them, knowing that they have been such a successful area for such a long period of time. Who are these people, these white people that are rolling up into this place thinking that they're better than everybody, wanting to change everything, wanting to take all of your stuff? It just seemed like a very ridiculous notion to them. So they're going to be very upset about this, really, as they should be. Excuse me. The interesting part is the East India Company, the East India Trading Company, British East India Trading Company, even had its own army, which was led by some British officers, and it was staffed by this group of people called sepoys. Sepoys are Indian soldiers that are fighting within the British military. So the significant part about this is not only did the British have their own separate military, which obviously we all know to be very strong, but just this one particular trading company, it is a company that just straight up has a trading network, is so massive and important in the world that they also have their own military to help protect them in times of war or in times of need or whatever the situation is over their trade routes. So it's a very expansive system. So because you have the British rolling up into India and they're taking everything over, essentially, they're also going to have Indians be a part of their British army. So these people, their term is a sepoy. It's leading into a story that I really like, that I think is quite interesting. Excuse me. By the 1830s, Again, this East India Company, which is totally regulated by the British government, winds up moving more heavily into India, and is really, you're really starting to see this big change over here. So they are considered to have pretty much total control over India at this point, and a lot of these Indians are starting to resent British rule. This picture is very telling. You've got these two people, obviously these two British people or people of British descent, who are here and who look very wealthy and comfortable, and she's got an umbrella to keep her shade. And then you've got, I don't know if you can see this way in the background, you've got like these Indian servants all the way back here. So you can see that there's this changeover that's happening, that these white people that are coming in feel that they are so much better than everybody else, that they're making these people be in servitude to them, even though you're talking about people who have had freedom and independence and have been able to do what they need to do under the terms of the Mughal Empire. It was quite a big changeover that was happening. This video does work. It is actually pretty good, so it's worth watching. You can go back and watch that, or pause this here to go ahead and watch this. Okay, this is the story that I actually really like. So in 1857, there was this rumor that started. Okay, so you've got like a very large, expansive military system that's happening in India, which is consisted of both British people and Indian soldiers, and it's mostly British officers over the Indian soldiers. And you're talking about some Indian soldiers who maybe used to be a higher up person within this Mughal system, but now have been sort of knocked down, so that they are now underneath the British soldiers. So that's also going to add to this anger that is starting to build up. So there was this thing that happened. The British officers, I guess they were bored. I'm not really sure what was going on there, but there was this rumor that's going to start. And it started with these British officers. They started this rumor that said the cartridges, the black powder cartridges, they're bullet cartridges, which are these things that are listed in this picture right here and right here. This thing up here, just to kind of give you an idea for what it does, inside of here is the black powder, and you would bite this portion off, like physically have to put it in your mouth because it really doesn't rip very well. Bite it off, and then you would pour this powder into the gun or the musket and then tamp it down, and then you would be able to fire it off. So the British officers decided that they wanted to have, I guess, a little bit of fun at the sepoy soldiers' expense. And they told them, or they started this rumor, that these new bullet cartridges were sealed, not just with like a plasticky sort of substance or paper or anything. Now they were sealed with a beef and pork fat. So it was fat before, but like that it was sealed on the inside in here, as well as this portion up here was now made with beef and pork fat, because it was just cheaper to be able to do that. So in order to use these cartridges, again, you had to bite off this seal, which means that you are then therefore putting beef and pork fat into your mouth. By the way, this isn't really true, but this is a rumor that's happening. So you had to put this thing in your mouth and be able to bite it off. Is anybody seeing the problem here with this? Both groups of people that are Indian, you're talking about Hindus and Muslims, would both have a problem with beef and pork. The Hindus consider the cow to be sacred, and the Muslims don't eat pork. So you're offending basically everybody in one fell swoop with one rumor. The sepoys, needless to say, rightly so, were outraged by this news, and then they started to refuse to accept these new cartridges, which meant that they were refusing to also therefore follow command. So it starts in this huge thing because, there's a couple of guys, some British officers that were maybe bored one day and decided that they wanted to start this rumor, which is pretty terrible. So it's going to eventually start this huge rebellion, and it's going to be called the Sepoy Rebellion or the Sepoy Mutiny. It's whatever, it's the same thing, tomato. And both the British and the Sepoys during this rebellion were just straight up mass slaughtering each other. Like, they just were attempting to kill off the other, and it was a really terrible time. But now all of these people are supposed to be working together in one army to defend this particular area of the world, but now they have this like civil war thing that's happening with them. So it's a pretty ridiculous situation. It winds up dying down. I'm going to be honest with you, I can't remember how it died down. I just remember that it did die down over time. Realized that it was some kind of rumor, I'm sure. Here are pictures of the Savoy Rebellion, just to kind of give you a visual. It was just soldiers fighting with soldiers within their camps. So like this says, the Sepoy Rebellion was eventually put down, and India is going to become a British possession after this. So what happens is Britain realizes, like the actual home country of Britain realizes, okay, crap, maybe, we can't let these people fend for themselves, and we need to actually send some representatives down to take over a more direct rule approach, because right now it's an indirect rule. They left some local people in place so that they could tell them what to do and then hope that it went that way. But seemingly with this Sepoy Rebellion, it did not seem to work out that way. So the British were like, all right, these people are savages. They don't know what they're doing. Let's send some people over there directly just to turn everything around and make sure it's going appropriately. So once they do this and turn it into a direct rule, it's going to run for quite a period of time, from 1757 to 1947. You're talking about almost 200 years. This time period in India became known as the Raj, R-A-J. You definitely need to know that, which is why it's in bold. But they just took direct, total command of India. It's, again, this period of time where the British ruled over all provinces and districts of India for roughly 200 years, and it was not the nicest of rules. I don't know if you guys have noticed this time period or not, but Britain is going to rule this particular area through World War I as well as through World War II, and then it does wind up winning its independence after World War II ends. World War II officially ends in 1945, and then it took a couple of years just to sort of figure out the bugs, and India does wind up becoming independent as a result of their help in World War II. Okay, so looking at the next slide, again, you're going to divide, just like you did last time, you're going to divide this particular box that you have available to write in your notes into two boxes, one side for positive and then one side for negative. Actually, it might already be done for you, so you might just be able to ignore me. Okay, so there's a couple of positive things. The first one, excuse me, Britain is going to provide India with a single system of law and government, which does wind up unifying India together, which is great because you do have two very different cultural people that you've got existing here. You've got Hindus and Muslims, and those are very different people. So this does wind up bringing everybody together, which is great. Unfortunately, it's not going to work out forever, and there is going to be some major disputes after the Raj dies down, and the Muslims and Hindus are going to break up after that, but that's a later story. English is going to become a unifying language, which again is great because you're going to have a ton of different dialects that existed in India before. So this does help to bring together excuse me, India as a country. The second positive effect is, again, Britain is going to, or any European country, whenever they roll up into an area, they are going to build roads and bridges and railroads and infrastructure and telegraph and telephone wires. So that is obviously a positive note. India's cottage industries, which is, again, where they're making goods in home, they were hurt by the British competition, so there is going to be a little bit more poverty there from people that relied on selling their goods out of their homes. So that does just further the gap between the British and the Indians. The last positive effect is going to be that the British built hospitals and they introduced new kinds of medicine. They're going to bring in new ways to grow food. It's providing for some famine relief. So again, that is excuse me, another positive that is taking place during this time. A negative, Um, One of the first negatives. So, healthcare improvements are actually going to lead to a population explosion, which we do know today that India is way overpopulated and way overcrowded. They have 1.2, I think, billion people there, and I think China has 1.3, something like that. Billion people there, so just a giant population explosion without an actual increase in economic opportunities, meaning jobs, things like that. So you have massive amounts of poverty that are going to be happening now and that actually still continue today in India. Another negative effect is that the Indians are looked down upon by the British, and their culture is just straight up treated as inferior. Again, racism applies to this particular area. The Indian workers are going to be the inexpensive laborers for the British masters. The last negative effect is that the Indians are going to basically work for long hours under horrible, as you can imagine, working conditions. The British are going to just gain extreme wealth, and the Indians are just terribly exploited, and it's a horrific situation, just as it is, in Africa. They're basically in the same boat. Here is a crash course video for you guys. It does cover all of imperialism. It's that John Green guy. I like him. I know that you guys like him. He does talk fast, though. But he does go over some things pretty well. He does talk about all of imperialism, even some aspects that we haven't actually talked about yet, which includes Egypt, China, and Japan. I'm getting there within the next lecture. So you can view this now if you would like to, and view it again later if you'd like to listen to him again. Once you actually hear all of the stories and stuff, you might be able to follow everything. But I wanted you to have the opportunity to view it now so that you could at least listen to the portions that he was talking about in terms of reviewing Africa and also listening about India today, which we just talked about. This is going to be your next task. This is actually in your notebook. I believe these instructions are in there for you. You're going to be writing a diary entry. I will explain this more in person. Thanks so much.